my dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today I have a special type of book talk video to share with you guys. Today I was sitting here and I was thinking about how we are just a couple months out from Margaret Atwood's much anticipated sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. The Handmaid's Tale was a book she wrote over 30 years ago at this point, I think, that was turned into a TV show 3 years ago. They're in their third season right now, I believe, and stars Elizabeth Moss, and it's fantastic. And as someone who has loved Margaret Atwood for so long, when that show got made, when that first season came out, what a thrill that was to get to see that finally brought to life, and brought to life so well. But anyway, this video is not about Margaret Atwood or The Handmaid's Tale. But while I was thinking about that, it also got me to thinking about another Canadian woman who has been an inspiration to me for many, many years. Margaret Atwood was the first Canadian author that really grabbed me by the throat as a novelist. But if you've been around my channel for a while, you know that I have a very special place in my heart for the very, very difficult art of a well-written short story. Anytime I talk about Stephen King, I talk about how that is a skill that he has. Like, his novels are great, you know, I have many that I love. But to me, where Stephen King really shines is in his short stories, because writing a good short story is so hard. Anyway, who I'm talking about today is Alice Munro. I first read an Alice Munro story, I think when I was in grade 9 or 10. And we read it in class, actually. And this would have been about a year before I would discover Margaret Atwood. But we read this Alice Munro story, and when it was done, I was a changed person. You know, I've always loved to read. Ever since I was a child, I loved to read. I've loved any form of storytelling. It's something that, it's the art form that connects with me the most. And when I read that first Alice Munro story in that classroom 25 years ago, it showed me that storytelling could be more. And as someone who had wanted to be a writer, I've wanted to be a writer since I can remember. Like, even when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, I was writing stories furiously on scraps of paper. And so discovering Alice Munro like that completely changed my understanding of what a storyteller could be. And while short stories aren't the, you know, the way that I choose to tell my stories most of the time, I've written some short stories, but even though that's not the way that I choose to tell my stories most of the time, it's something that I respect so much, someone who is so good at it. Alice Munro wrote her first book, which was called The Dance of the Happy Shades, and she wrote that book over the course of 15 years. She was a young mother, and she had small children at home, 3 or I think she has 4 children now, but at that point she had 3. And she took her time. She would plan her stories when she was going about her day, and then when her children would nap in the afternoons, she would just write. She would write and write as much as she could until they woke up again. And while it took her, you know, 15 years to get that book finished, she got it finished. And not only did she get it finished, but that year it went on to win a Governor General's Award, which is a huge literary award here in Canada. I love those stories of moms who are kind of in their momness, you know, they're doing what they have to do day in and day out, but they're still quietly, slowly but surely working on their dreams. That's just such a beautiful story of, you know, not giving up, not forgetting about who you are. I love that. And for Alice, not only did she go on to write so many beautiful short stories, she more or less revolutionized the way short stories were written, especially the way that a short story could move back and forth through time. It didn't have to be something linear, paraded out. You could do more with it. And Alice Monro, she did so much more with it. When you look at her collection of works, you can see there's so many amazing stories there. Stories about women, stories about daughters and mothers and sisters and lovers, and there's so many lives unfolding in these books that you can't help but fall in love with every single one of them. Alice Monro is currently 88 years old, and in 2012, so what's that, 7 years ago now, she put out her last book, and this book is called Dear Life, and it's such a good book. It's so good. And I remember hearing like, oh, this could possibly be her final book, because you know, she's 88 years old now. I can understand her wanting to take a break after so many decades of amazing stories. When you look at her offerings throughout the years, the earlier works, of which there are so many amazing ones. I recently read an article where it went through and it asked a bunch of Canadian writers and publishers and booksellers and things like that to name the Alice Monro story that really affected them the most, or that they first read, or something like that. And there's just, what I love about it too is that the stories can be so personal. When you're reading through the list, I don't think two people named the same story. And isn't that amazing how stories can affect people differently? You know, that's amazing. And I'm just so grateful for Alice Monro. One of the things she really tackles in her books too are kind of the two very unique, complex, difficult, different transitioning times in a woman's life. And in her earlier works, you can see her really tackling coming of age stories, you know, girls and that time of their life, which is such a difficult time, isn't it, when you're, you know, that coming of age period. And then in her later works, a lot of her stories are about sort of transitioning into middle age, and those are the two time periods that she really focuses on for these women. And Dear Life is a wonderful example of that. Another one of my favorites that I have here on hand is I've read this book 3 times so far, and it's Hate Ship, Friendship, Courtship, Love Ship, Marriage. And you know, there's stories for kind of all of those things in here, and it's beautiful. Another one that I love is called The Love of a Good Woman. That's so good. And of course the earlier books as well, they're all just fantastic. It was such a treat in, you know, 1995 or whenever it was that I discovered Alice Monro, to then be able to look back and go back through all of the books she'd previously released and just have this whole treasure chest of stories to read. And back then, being a teenager, you know, especially I was a young teenager at that point, like 13, 14, a lot of it was a bit too old for me. So then later, when I reread it as an adult, you know, my late 20s and 30s, it meant something different entirely. But even still, at that young age, I knew how special and important these works were going to be. Another thing that's really lovely is, like I said, Dear Life came out in 2012, and then in 2013 Alice won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and that is quite an amazing accomplishment, I would say. So she would have been 82 at the time. Amazing. Amazing. I've never had the chance to meet Alice Monro, which is one of the great sadnesses of my sort of literature loving life. And she changed everything for me when I was a teenager. And then, you know, a year or two later, about a year later, I guess, Margaret Atwood came along. And so if Alice Monro had started to shake things up, Margaret Atwood came in like a hurricane and blew the top off of my life in terms of seeing what writers can do. And I was reading an interview with Alice Monro a few days ago, and she was talking about how she had always wanted to be a writer when she was a little girl. You know, she just always wanted it. But, you know, she said it just wasn't something you went around saying all the time back then. She says, I don't know if it's because I was Canadian or because I was a woman or because I was some mixture of the two, but it was just something I always kept to myself. And how interesting. There's just something about that quiet grace just gets me right in the feelings. Anyway, you guys, so I just wanted to share my thoughts and my love of Alice Monro with you. If you love well-written stories about interesting characters, you can literally open up Amazon, type in Alice Monro, pick any book, anyone, and you can't go wrong with it, you know? So definitely check her out. And if you have already, let me know in the comments down below. And yeah, I just wanted to share her with you guys today because she's been on my mind. And with the upcoming release of Margaret Atwood's sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, I'm going to be doing a dedicated video to Margaret Atwood. Not just the one for the review of the book, but a dedicated video kind of like this, but I've been working on it for a few months now, and it's going to be a bit of a special video for me, and I can't wait to share her with you guys. So I hope you have a fantastic weekend. I hope this video finds you enjoying the sunshine, enjoying your summer, and I will see you guys on Monday with another paranormal video. Bye guys.